All right, so I'm just going to start by introducing everybody. So my name is Dana Cracciolo. I'm with the Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance of Climbers. Also with EPAC tonight, we have Joe Forte and Kate Federoff. From the Access Fund, we have Mike Morin, and I'm going to have him do his own intro in a minute. But we're also welcoming Ken Hull, who's our PA Access Fund ambassador, and also with SEPC and helps with SWPAC. And I think Jeanette's on here too from SWPAC. So it's nice to have some friendly folks in the audience from the other LCOs, because we've been really working hard together on a lot of initiatives, some of which you'll hear about tonight. But real quickly, for those of you who don't know Mike and how he plays a role in this, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself there, Mike?
Yeah, sure thing, Dana. So yeah, hi everybody. My name is Mike Morin, as Dana mentioned. I'm the Northeast Regional Director for the Access Fund. And so I'm located, calling in tonight from Bartlett, New Hampshire. But in my role with the Access Fund, I work on access projects, policy acquisitions, conservation and stewardship, really all things that fit under the Access Fund banner here in the Northeast. And so in the Access Fund's world, the Northeast ranges from Maine down to Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and everything in between. So I work with a variety of local climbing organizations like EPAC and the other LCOs that Dana mentioned in the introduction. And really, my role and the Access Fund's role more broadly is to support the good work that volunteers like Dana, Joe, Kate, and others are doing to steward and address access issues at local climbing areas. We also work on the national level on the federal side of things, but for me personally, kind of bread and butter of my work really is that local support and working on private land access. We do a lot of kind of land trust work here in the Northeast through the Access Fund. So both Tilbury and Mocanaqua have private land components to it. And so, yeah, you'll learn more about that tonight. But it's been great to work with Dana and Joe, and excited to keep digging into these projects and others.
Nice. So I'll turn it over to Joe to kind of get us going on why we're here tonight and what's happening. Remember to unmute yourself, Joe.
Okay, so for our opening trivia question photo, this photo was taken from the penitentiary, which overlooks the Wyoming Valley, and Tilbury and Mocanaqua are both in the Wyoming Valley. So little known crag that's out there to be found. So who are we? We are EPAC. We are the Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance of Climbers. We are your local climbing organization in Eastern Pennsylvania. We were formed about 2 years ago when we saw the need in our local crags. With the pandemic came a whole lot of new people moving outdoors, climbing, and a whole lot of trash and a whole lot of new graffiti and parking issues and human waste issues. And we said, you know what, we're all kind of doing this individually at our own little crags. Maybe it's time we unite and form a local climbing organization. And so we join our other local climbing organizations in Pennsylvania. We have the Southwestern Pennsylvania Climbers Coalition and the South Central Pennsylvania Climbers Coalition. So now we've got a well-rounded coverage across the state. So we saw all these access issues coming up, and one of the first things that popped up when we formed EPAC was, oh no, they want to see if they could turn Mocanaqua into an off-highway vehicle park. And we were like, what does this mean for climbing? This came on our radar early, and we were like, whoa, are we ready to take this on? So one of the first things we did was we reached out to Mike from the Access Fund and said, okay, where do we go from here? And we found out it was complex. There's a lot of landowners involved here. And so I'm going to start off by just doing a brief overview of whose land it is and sort of what rules do they go by. So let's start with state forests. State forests encompass some of the climbing in Mocanaqua and in Tilbury. The state forest mission is centered around plants. You could think forest, plants. State forests were not designed for recreation, although they do allow for recreation, but they focus their recreation opportunities on dispersed recreational opportunities. Some things you will not find in state forests are things like prepared walkways, signage, railings, bridges, things like that. State forests are meant to be kept pristine and preserved, kind of the way nature intended them. Good news is climbing is allowed in most of Pennsylvania state forests. It is public land, and climbing is sort of kept safe there for us. And this map here shows a little overview of the Pinchot State Forest in the Mocanaqua area. So you could see that main wall falls within the state forest, but all the other areas in Mocanaqua fall outside of it. I should say main wall and the Boulder Garden both fall within it. So that's state forests. Next, we'll talk about game lands. State game lands, you can think, game was a word that was analogous to wild animals in the past. And so the Game Commission's mission is to protect animals as well as their habitat. This is their primary function, although recent studies have shown that of users of state game lands, only about 35% of users on state game lands are actually hunters. So it's used for all sorts of other recreation. That said, their primary mission is to protect the animals and their habitat. So recreation kind of comes second to those two priorities on state game lands. And we saw the effects of that in Western Pennsylvania recently when climbing was closed on some state game lands in Western PA. So some game lands allow it, some game lands do not. And this map shows the game lands that are related to the Mocanaqua area. You'll see that small rectangle down near the lower left-hand corner of this graphic. That encompasses Squirrel Rock. So Squirrel Rock is on State Game Lands 224. Next, we'll talk about state parks. State parks, you could think park, recreation, a place to play. State parks are designed for recreation. They often do have prepared walkways, bridges, signs, kiosks, things like that. They are made to make the outdoors more accessible. And oftentimes the focus at state parks is recreation. Unfortunately, none of the land in Mocanaqua or Tilbury fall into the state park category. But we are exploring state parks within Eastern Pennsylvania and how we could potentially open up more climbing opportunities on state parks in our region. And lastly, we'll talk about the Earth Conservancy. The Earth Conservancy currently does not allow rock climbing. And this was brought to our attention at the off-highway vehicle meetings. For many, many years, people climbed on Earth Conservancy land. There was even handshake agreements where people were under the impression that they allowed rock climbing. But at these recent meetings, it was made clear that they don't allow rock climbing. So this is our main reason for concern. If you look at this map, you'll see the dark green, that's Pinchot State Forest. The tan sliver that contains Hawk Rock, Paradise, the Coal Bowl, the library, that is all owned by the Earth Conservancy. The reason this land was never transferred over to DCNR was because there is an active mining lease on this land. So this land still does fall under the ownership of the Earth Conservancy, and these crags are currently closed because of that. So I'll go back to this off-highway vehicle study. In 2019, they determined that it would be economically productive for this region to create an off-highway vehicle riding area. And this raised a lot of concerns to us. EPAC went to the public meetings. We attended both public meetings, and we provided a lot of commentary and input. And our main concerns were, hey, how is this going to affect climbing? So, the first thing we did following these meetings was we contacted the Access Fund, we contacted the Earth Conservancy, we contacted DCNR, And we got a dialogue happening. We facilitated conversations, and we worked with Mike, and we said, okay, how can we solve this? At these meetings, DCNR reassured us that any land that's currently on state forest land will remain open. It is public land, and it is our right to recreate on that land. So that was very reassuring. But we were also made clear that the Earth Conservancy does not allow rock climbing. And when we dug down to it, we realized that it was because of their concerns of both insurance and concerns of liability. They've been involved with lawsuits because accidents relating ATVs and so on and so forth. And so, that's on their radar to protect themselves. So that's their primary concern. So we said, okay, what are some potential solutions? What could we do to open climbing back up? Our first choice was to transfer the land to DCNR, to the state forest. We said, well, would the Earth Conservancy be willing to do that? It turns out they were willing to do that. But the problem was DCNR will not take land that has an open mining lease. And there is still an open mining lease on that sliver of land that I showed. So we said, okay, could we potentially provide secondary insurance to the land if that's a concern? Or maybe we can work in an operational agreement with DCNR and kind of treat the land like it was state forest until that mining lease is gone. And the Earth Conservancy wasn't comfortable with that. They ran it by their lawyers, and they said, we don't think that's going to provide enough liability protection for us. So we said, okay, maybe a waiver system can work. Initially, they said, well, that could work for your members, but turns out, every climber in Eastern PA should be an EPAC member, but it's not that simple. We don't just have a roster of who our members are. So we're currently still exploring this option of potentially maybe there is a waiver system that can work on this land. And then another potential solution is that the Earth Conservancy is currently reaching out to the mining leaseholder to see if it could be modified or even closed. And in this case, if they do close the mining lease, then the Earth Conservancy can transfer the land to DCNR, and that would be a win-win situation. It would become state forest, and then it would be protected for future access. Okay. So what has EPAC done to support future access in Moc? First, we facilitated conversations between the Access Fund, Earth Conservancy, and DCNR. We started these conversations. We've hosted 2 Climb and Clean events in the past year, which were very successful. We removed 51 bags of trash and all sorts of other junk you're going to see on the next screen. We notified DCNR of an illegal dumping site that we happened upon, and we found that there was a gate that was damaged, and that's how the people were going back to dump the trash. So DCNR is going to repair that gate in the near future. We're also adopting a section of Lee Road through the Adopt a Highway program. And we're also hosting local Jim DeCrag events to help educate our local climbers and make sure that when they go out safe and they go out as stewards of the land. Here's just 2 photos from our past 2 Climb and Cleans. As you can see, they're a whole lot of fun, and we get to find all sorts of treasure. So if you're interested, please come out to our next stewardship event, and you too can find a fake Christmas tree and a plastic Santa Claus. So what can you do to support future access? Like I said, attend a local stewardship event. If you go to our website, epaclimbers.org, you'll find information on all of our upcoming events. We encourage you to attend public meetings and provide your input. When that Mocanaqua study came about, we asked people to provide public commentary. There was a survey that went out, and unfortunately, they didn't hear from a lot of climbers. They did hear from some climbers, but not as many as we'd hoped. So when we have an opportunity to speak up, let's make sure we speak up, and also let's be part of a positive dialogue. There's a lot of stuff on social media where, people make comments like, oh, this is BS, this isn't fair. That sort of commentary doesn't help our case. We want to be a part of the positive dialogue. We want to talk about what we're doing as climbers to protect the land, to be stewards of the land, and to care for it. And, we want to preserve our reputation as, rational and responsible users of these lands. I remind you again, follow leave no trace principles, leave it cleaner than you came, respect these local closures. I know some people want to challenge the fact that it's closed, but please trust us in that it is closed. We have had much dialogue with the Access Fund, and they have reassured us, yes, it is indeed closed, but we're working to get it reopened. And then, Mike, these last two are involving the Access Fund. Would you speak to the Climbers Pact?
Yeah, sure thing, Joe. And thanks for that great overview. That was really well done. I think it's, really clearly painted the picture of what's going on there. And, I think, so the Climbers Pact, just a high level, I'm going to drop actually a link into the chat so that folks can access it if they'd like here as I'm talking. The Climbers Pact is a bit fashioned around the leave no trace principles, if you're familiar with those. But we really worked to tailor them to the things that we engage in as climbers. So thinking about brushing off, tick marks, and thinking about seasonal wildlife closures, and all the things that go into being a responsible climber on our lands. And one of those key components of the Climbers Pact is what we call access, which is that respecting rules and closures. We found over the years that really being respectful of landowners and land managers' management decisions goes a long way to building strong partnerships so that we can eventually address these closures that do arise from time to time. And I'll just note that, the work that EPAC is doing and just these cleanups in the short time that EPAC has been a formally organized organization, they go a long way to developing those levels of trust and showing that climbers are a group that can give back to the land and really assist with management of a site, and hopefully encourage land managers and private landowners to feel like the climbers are a net positive when they invite them onto the land or allow them on the land as a user group. So I think the Mocanaqua issue will be resolved in time, but it is going to take time. These issues, unfortunately, never go quickly. It takes relationship building. It takes conversations between agencies, and in this case, a private organization that owns and manages the land. Plus, you have the complication of a mining lease. So, really, just encourage everybody to be patient and know that this is being worked on, and folks like Joe and Dana and others are really on the ball on this and doing really good work, and we're there to support them as well. And then I'll just speak briefly to the Access Fund and EPAC. We are nonprofit climbing organizations. Access Fund, we just celebrated our 30th anniversary as a climbing advocacy and conservation nonprofit organization. And EPAC formed, I think, last year, maybe 2 years ago now. Time is 2 years. Yeah, time is kind of a time warp. But both of our organizations rely on the support of the local climbing community to get our work done. And EPAC is an affiliate of the Access Fund and a joint member. So you are able to actually visit Access Fund website and both support the Access Fund in EPAC if you choose to. And this work, it takes money. It takes money to organize a cleanup. It takes buy trash bags to run a website. And I just I work with local climbing organizations all over the Northeast and have worked with climbing organizations all over the country. And I can say that EPAC is really a strong organization run by a group of really dedicated folks who really have your back. So that's my plug for EPAC. But it's with sincere honesty that I say that. So I'll leave it there.
Nice. Yeah. Speaking of which, tomorrow is actually our 2-year anniversary of incorporation. Yay. So yeah, there's nothing in the chat right now about any questions related to Mocanaqua. So I'd encourage people, if you have any questions about it specifically, throw them in the chat now. So I'll give a minute for that. If not, we'll move on to Tilbury. And then if you do think of something, feel free to throw it in the chat and we'll circle back around to it. So, all right. So I'm up next. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. Can everybody see that okay? Great, excellent. All right, so Tilbury. So we decided to put Tilbury in here because it was the same, probably set of climbers and definitely land managers, as Joe already showed that, there's a lot of interconnectedness there. And Tilbury is currently open. It's in state forest land with climbing and any recreational activity. You are allowed to do it until you're told you're not. So ATV is a big one right now, that there's a lot of postings that you're not allowed to have ATVs, or there's some equestrian trails. Mountain bikers have also had some issues in state parks and state forests. And so there's only certain tracks in state forests that are open for mountain biking. So what we wanted to do was put on your radar some concerns that we have that might be coming down the pipeline in terms of access. And I'll be the first person to say that I've actually never climbed at Tilbury before. So if you're kind of wondering, like, who is this chick? I haven't run into her. I have just not made it up to that neck of the woods. But the access issues that we're talking about related to Tilbury, or that could be related to Tilbury, are all things that I've dealt with in other climbing areas. So I'm going to just go through 3 key points here. The first one being parking. So when EPAC first formed, we kind of asked people like, hey, what does your local climbing area need? What's going on out there? Tell us about your climbing area. And one of the things that was brought to our attention was that there wasn't really a great parking situation, or some people just weren't sure of the parking situation. And as Joe said, we had this Mocanaqua thing thrown at us, and we're like, well, what can we actually bite off here? And, parking, we were like, okay, we can look into parking and see what's going on. And we identified 3 potential places for parking or partnerships. So the first one is Plymouth Township, which is down here in this bottom left corner here. And so there we were kind of looking at, is there any public land? Are there any vacant lots? Is there any way we could partner with Plymouth Township to develop something that could be a public parking area? We didn't get very far with them. A lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, but they basically said, show up at the Monday night meeting and say your piece. So we said, well, we're not really ready to commit to that. So then we looked into what is now the Tilbury Community Center, which was formerly the fire department. It sort of got decommissioned during all of this and was turned into a community center. And so there is a small parking lot, kind of a gravel pull-off that I'm sure most of you are aware of, at the bottom of the hill there, which is Plymouth Township. But then there's that lot in front of the old fire company and the adjacent building, which is their property. And so we actually had some conversations with them, and they were sort of open to the idea. Again, they were worried about liability and how that might look. So we talked a little bit with them, but also when they turned into a community center, the way that they were making money, and this community center does a lot to provide food and assistance in the area. So one of the ways they're making their money is doing things like banquets and events. And so they sort of said, well, we're going to kind of need our parking, especially if people are coming on the weekends. We're not sure about this. And then the third one was up in this top right corner here, which is a private property area. So here's a better map of that. And so the yellow is the private property area. The green is DCNR State Forest. And then part of it leading up to it is Plymouth Township. And it's hard to see, but you could see the road here kind of comes up and around that curve. So it's Plymouth Township on one side and private property on the other. And this is where people have historically been parking, maybe not understanding that it's private. Some people thought it was a vacant lot. Some people thought it was state forest land. So we drilled down on that, found the property owner, and started reaching out to them. And that was about, March 2021. We started dialogue with them. I talked with them all through the summer and actually was able to meet with them last October. I drove out and met with the couple. Really nice couple. It's a family plot that her dad was going to build a house on. He was a engineer for the mining companies and she has this box of meticulous drawings down to the number of nails that would have been needed for this house. They had a lot of problem with the demo work because of the rock and stuff underneath. And then family things happened. Eventually he passed away, and, they now own this piece of property. And so our conversation was kind of, hey, what's your intention with this property? And if you're ever looking to get rid of it, we might be interested in doing something. Our goal is to really conserve access and maybe have a parking area / trailhead to these cliffs. And they were really on board with that. They're very conservation-minded people. And they like the idea of the land not being developed and it being a place that their family for generations could always go to. So it was really a great conversation, and they went ahead and talked with all of the people involved. So sisters and kids and grandkids and that stuff like that, and everybody was like, yeah, we don't see developing the area. We like that idea. And so we sort of came back around to all right, well, now what do we do? So we sort of have this loose agreement that they're not going to act on the property without maybe letting us know first. And they're at the point right now where, they're doing some life planning and would be ready to get rid of the property sort of anytime we were ready to act on it. So that gives us 3 options. So, and all of these have pros and cons. So EPAC could acquire the property and hold the property. The pro is that gives us complete control over how we can use it, obviously within whatever sort of township and local ordinances allow. The con to that is we're maybe not financially, operationally, or insurance ready for something like that. So it might not be in the best interest for us to hold a parking lot, but we could do it if we needed to. We could partner with a land trust on conservation. So this would allow the land to be protected under a conservation easement, most likely, so it would never be developed. And land trusts do this all the time. Like, this is their work, and they're the professionals in this. The flip side of that is we may not have control over what it becomes. It might become a trailhead. It might become a parking area. We may or may not have a whole lot of say in that. And then the last one is direct acquisition by DCNR. And DCNR is out there buying up a lot of land. So they're trying to connect tracks and trails and build out state forests and state parks so that they, touch the more urban areas. And especially in the Pinchot State Forest, I think they've been adding land to that forest faster than any other forest in Pennsylvania. So they definitely have the money and the ability to do that. And we have an in there, with the person that does acquisitions in that area. But again, it's kind of the same con as the conservation, the land trust, is that we don't know what they're going to do with it. Is it going to be a trailhead? Are they going to allow parking? We might be able to tell them what we want, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And then also dealing with DCNR, you have environmental studies and assessments, and everything goes a bit slower. So it might not be the quickest option either. The thing with all 3 of these is they're going to require some sort of contact with DCNR. And so we can't really go to them and say, hey, we got this great plot of land we want you to buy, or we want you to help us with. And they're going to say, well, why? And then we're going to have to sort of point to Tilbury as a climbing area. And to what degree it's on their radar, we don't actually know. But if everybody is in favor of, like, yeah, let's protect this property, we want to have a solid, potential parking / trailhead area with nice, easy access to the cliffs, we do have to bring DCNR into that so that we can make sure, as part of the state forest management plan, that climbing is going to be a portion of that, which it is currently because of Mocanaqua. But if they keep adding climbing areas, we don't know at what point they might say, okay, did we get too far into this? So the next thing, which is one of my favorites, if you've seen me on any of the ice climbing stuff, are peregrines. So a quick overview for people who don't follow peregrines in climbing, but they were wiped out by DDT in the 40s, 50s. All the peregrines were gone by, say, mid 70s. And, the federal government stopped in and said, okay, we got to do something about this, put them under endangered species protection. And then they were delisted around 1999, mostly because the populations came back in the West. Okay. So the overall population came back enough to delist them. However, certain states still had to hit their benchmarks pre-DDT, and Pennsylvania fell under that. The good news is that they were hitting their growth metrics, and this last fall, September 2021, they were delisted at a state level. So that's good for us because it means it gives us a little bit more wiggle room to talk to state officials about policies and closures and that sort of thing. And what these folks tend to do is rely on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act to continue to extend protections to the birds. So even if they're delisted at the federal level, even if they're delisted at the state level, they still have protections which, arguably might be somewhat misapplied through the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So the thing is we know there's peregrines up at Tilbury. DCNR knows they're up at Tilbury. Game Lands knows they're up at Tilbury. Everyone knows there's peregrine up at Tilbury. And this map just kind of shows you why EPAC is concerned, is these are all the active peregrine territories, and a territory is like a nesting site and a certain like area around a nesting site that a peregrine considers its territory. And as you can see, they're mostly in eastern Pennsylvania. So we're pretty sure we have a lot of peregrine work ahead of us. And in terms of those growth metrics that we talked about, you'll see these are for Pennsylvania. And so nothing really on the radar in 85, started building. If you're familiar with the Narrows, which is an ice climbing area in Bucks County, that started in 2016. And at the time we had, I think, 6 nesting pairs, which is this yellow line here. And then if we go to 2021, which is this last bar, I think we're up to about 19 pairs. And you also notice how big this bar got. So blue is buildings, orange is bridges. You can see these birds prefer artificial structures at this point. However, our wildlife biologist friends prefer the cliffs and quarries because the birds tend to be able to reproduce at a better rate there. They don't have the problems that they do with buildings and bridges and coming in contacts with, cars and construction and things like that. So they still try very hard to protect the cliff nesting and quarry nesting birds. So one of the reasons that's on our radar, and I apologize that this is sort of fuzzy, but it's the best one that I could find, is if you can see the color coding on here, blue is bridges, red is buildings, yellows are towers, gray are quarries. So these green ones are all of our cliffs. And so we know up here is our Mount Mincy closure. Here's our Narrows closure. Here is French Creek, which our friends at Birdsboro Association of Climbers has been trying to open. It has other things going on, but definitely a peregrine. Here's our Safe Harbor closure. There. Our Safe Harbor closure, which just got imposed this last year. And then if you follow basically the water line here, the river, up in here in Luzerne County, we have 4 nesting pairs and then more beyond that. So the good news is maybe these peregrines found rock that we didn't know about. But the bad news is right now we're looking at 19 potential closures. And the reason that that's not great for us, and we know this from the Narrows closure, is because Game Commission imposes what we call a linear closure. So if you look here to this little yellow dot, what they do is they close everything in roughly 1,000 feet in every direction from the nest. So if you're a Narrows climber, you know that pretty much covers everything. So where these red lines are is where the closure should be. Now, when we advocated for a better closure, DCNR was able to scoot it in a little bit. And so we have these orange marks, which is where the closure actually is. But the best ice climbing in this closure, we don't have access to. What the Access Fund advocates for, and what we see more readily in climbing areas throughout the nation, is what's called a viewshed closure. So if you look up to this big graph, there's this little green dot, which is the nest. Okay. And then this is like a 50-foot mark, 100-foot mark. And everything that's in pink, the peregrines can't see, which means it shouldn't really affect them. So you can see here, they can see very little, except maybe over here to the left. So all of this ice climbing here and through here, which is how this band, it kind of looks like curtains going in and out. So if they can't see it, it shouldn't really affect them. So if you've been up to maybe like the Gunks and you've been climbing and you're kind of like, wow, there's a peregrine on the other side of this corner. Well, if it can't see you, it's not really being affected by you. And this is kind of very, putting it very simply, but we are in favor of a view shed closure, and we brought this to the meeting for the Narrows. And unfortunately, we didn't get very far with it. But what we want to do and what we're hoping to do in the fall is revisit the Narrows closure, because we need better policy. So if all of those 19 nest areas, if we assume that they're all active climbing sites, and Game Land says, oh, you're climbing there, we have to impose this linear closure. For Tilbury, think that's going to be 1,000 feet in either direction. All of those routes would be closed. And that's not necessarily the case with a view shed closure, because it's going to be based on the topography of the cliff. So what we're trying to do, and this is happening definitely at local levels, but we're trying to get conversations started on state level in terms of, okay, well, what does raptor management look like? What's the science? What's the research? What do we see other climbing areas doing? And now we have a lot of data to support that. And what do we want to see happen in Pennsylvania? We're not saying that the climbers should come before the birds, but we know that there's a way for climbers to coexist with things like raptors and bats and, species that need special protection. Like, we know we can do this, and we have examples. We just need to convince the people who make these decisions to work with us on that. So we're really looking at this as a statewide issue, and a policy issue. And, we're going to be bringing in all of these smaller areas, but, we can expect that if, the game lands really wanted to come in and say, hey, there's a peregrine here, and hey, you're climbing here, hey, this is now closed, which is sort of what happened at Safe Harbor. And luckily, everybody's been 100% compliant with the closures that we've had. So I think that gives us the ability to go and really talk to people about, well, let's, they're delisted now, they're thriving. Let's look at adjusting this policy in a way that it benefits, the species as well as the climbers. So then the last thing is the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. I'm not going to go into too many specifics, but to put it sort of simply, they go through and do these inventories where they look at the ecological resources. So they take this snapshot, if you will, of plants and animals and geological features and what's going on, and they use this to drive conservation work and land use planning, so that they can keep habitats and species of concern or species of interest, from going to extinct or getting into any sort of construction or development that's going to make it so that these ecological resources can't thrive. And so the good news is Tilbury doesn't really have many. In fact, it said it has poor population of PA rare plant species. Now, this was pre-peregrine, so we can expect the peregrine will show up on this. Thin soil, basically not a lot's going to grow there. I think they identified maybe four plants to kind of keep an eye on. But they said there's no special management that's recommended for the site. So that's good for us. However, the Luzerne County Index is coming due in 2026. And so what's going to happen there is they're going to reissue a report in 2026, and they're going to compare it with the report from 2006, so 20 years back, and they're going to see what's changed. Okay, they're going to look at inventories of plants, animals, but they're also going to look at land development. They're going to look at how recreation has had an impact on this. And so we can expect the field work for this to start 1 to 3 years prior to the report, which means, in the next, 2023 to 2024, 25, there's going to be a lot of people crawling around Pinchot State Forest, Tilbury, Mocanaqua, doing these inventories, but also looking to see how the land has changed for the better and for the worse, and not just climbers, but all recreationalists and also illegal uses like ATVs and whatnot. And our concern with this is the recent county reports haven't reflected climbing favorably. And this is, if you've been following, what our friends at SWPAC have been dealing with the game lands closures, that county report came out 2021, and the closure and some of those discussions just recently happened. And part of that, we assume, is because there are people out there actively looking at now how the land has changed. Also, in prior reports, there was no mention of rock climbing except in the Narrows, where ice climbing and the agreement with DCNR has been, specifically laid out. But the language in the documents were not favorable or positive, looking at climbing as destructive use, but also monitoring rock climbing. Rock climbing popped up like 9, 10, maybe 13 times in this document, whereas previously it didn't come up at all. So again, our concern with this is about Tilbury, but also any county that's coming up for this inventory. People are going to be looking around out there, and we know that climbing has changed a lot in the last 20 years. We know that there's many more outdoor climbers, even in the last 5 years. So we're concerned that the impact that our recreation, especially on cliffs specifically, and how that's going to drive closures and access. So, that's what we're sort of concerned about as we start moving through this. So, in general, a lot of climbing areas in PA have been sort of flying under the radar. As Joe said, there have been a lot of handshake agreements in the past. And, we're under the belief that that's going to be coming to an end soon. People are going to be noticing rock climbing because of the sheer population. Prompton State Park reached out to us about closing that officially because they found it on Mountain Project. They see social media posts of people out on their land doing things. So it's kind of hard to hide with the proliferation of outdoor climbers. And also that, I think climbing's always been a, ask forgiveness, not permission. And that culture is sort of changing in that if we don't start asking for permission, or maybe going back and apologizing and asking for permission, then our landowners are just going to close things down because they're scared of liability. They're scared of management practices. So one of our big goals is to be proactive in all these conversations. And that's one of the reasons we put the Tilbury-Mocanaqua pieces together, is because all of the good work we're doing at Mocanaqua, we've got a great relationship with them. And so we're hoping if things come up in Tilbury or anywhere in Pinchot State Forest, that we'll be able to have good conversations about this. Maybe hard conversations, but good conversations about, hey, look what we did over here. This is what we believe. Okay, we understand, this is how development happened. Maybe you're not happy with, a trail, or now we have to deal with a peregrine and a raptor closure. Like, how do we do this together? And I think that's something we're finding as EPAC in general, is every time we look at a new climbing area, we're finding that, handshake agreements of the past are not necessarily relevant now. So I work a lot with High Rocks, and I was the person shaking the hands 20 years ago. And now we're working on, a document with climbing management plan. So that way there's something in writing going forward into the future that we can go back to. And so that's sort of our goal in all of this, is not to get anything closed or anything restricted, but to make sure that things stay open as best we can. Because if we just get handed some sort of decision, it's going to be, extremely hard, like our friends at SWPAC are dealing with now with game lands. We're going to have to work long and hard to get things reopened again. So if we can keep them from getting closed in the first place, then that is sort of our best case scenario. So resources, again, in case you want to look any of this up, we're going to post this on our website, and it'll be in a PDF form. So these will be clickables. If you really want to read about peregrines, here's where all of our information is coming from. The county natural heritage inventories. You can look up whatever county you're in and see what they were looking at and when that's coming up next. DCNR does have climbing guidelines. So these were established in 2009. Something that we've been working on with other LCOs in the state is updating those guidelines. They were good enough when written, but definitely out of date, and some of the language is quite restrictive. And so they are in markup right now, and we're hoping to circle back around with the team at DCNR that's working on climbing policy and, try to get things moving in a better direction for climbers. And it does outline, things like removing of vegetation, installing fixed hardware, commercial guiding practices. So DCNR does have that. Game Lands does not, that I know of, have a written policy in terms of climbing development and action on their land. It falls just under the general recreation rule. And then our website is there, obviously. My last plug, because I'm also on the finance committee, is again, supporting the Access Fund and Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance of Climbers if you're able to. We are an all volunteer organization. So none of this money is going into any of our pockets. We just want to have the resources. So if all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we need to buy that private property, to maintain parking and access, then we can do that. Or if, Mocanaqua, we need to help them fix a gate, or we need to pay for insurance because the Earth Conservancy wants to extend some sort of lease agreement or a waiver system. We want to be able to have that in place so that we can do that right away and not have to go searching for funding. So I will stop sharing.
Dana, would you be willing to share some of your experience with DCNR and their eagerness to open up more climbing areas and acquire more land? That was some really exciting work that you were involved in. And I think it's important for everyone to know that they do have climbing on their radar, and they want to open up more areas.
Yeah. So we made contact with somebody in DCNR about 2 years ago now, and that person since retired, but still is a climbing advocate, not a climber herself. Her children are climbers, and she started this climbing action team in DCNR to specifically address climbing as a recreational sport. And we went through and we noticed things like, there's only 3 state parks that are technically approved for rock climbing. So it's McConnell's Mills, Ohio Pile, and Ralph Stover State Park. Every place else, and some folks probably climb there, I know I'm guilty of it, is not an actual approved activity. And so we said, hey, we need to fix this. And so the same thing with state forests, even though they weren't, we don't need permission per se, they kind of realized they have a lot of climbing, but nobody knows about it. And so we went into some meetings with the folks from SWPAC and SCPC, and Mike was in on those for the purposes of educating them about climbing, about stewardship, about these policy pieces, and we're slowly inching through getting areas open. So Prompton, which Joe's been working with, like I said, they reached out to us and said, hey, we don't allow climbing. So we closed it, we circled the wagons, we got back to them, and now it's, working its way through the DCNR process, and had actually been identified in the park management plan to open that as a recreational activity. And nobody knew that because nobody actually read the management plan.
They came back to us and said, well, hey, we actually want to open it to climbing now. Can you help us out? So it was pretty cool to see what went from a closure. Now they're like eager to say, okay, show us how to manage climbing and help us open it up. I thought that was a really cool success story.
And I think one of the big drivers right now is DCNR just hired their first outdoor recreation director. And the idea is that recreation brings money, into the Commonwealth. And right now, I think Pennsylvania is sitting in 6th place behind other states, and they want to climb up that ladder. They want to know that people want to come and travel to Pennsylvania, spend their money in Pennsylvania, sleep, eat, do whatever in Pennsylvania. And so that whole recreation economics is really big right now. And one of the reasons for that is because we had a lot of mining, and we have a lot of extractive industries that left this barren land. And definitely in the Luzerne County area, as you folks might know, there's a lot of mines, and mining's not coming back, but recreation is. And that's one of the reasons that OHV study came in, is because they said, we've got these lands that we can't use for anything. We can't mine them anymore. So what can we turn them into that's going to bring economic development back to this area? So that is a huge driving force right now as well. So they have a stake in creating recreation, and climbers are the kind of people that travel, So we've been staying in contact with not only the local levels for keeping our access, but the leadership levels at DCNR, to help drive into them. We might not be a destination climbing area. We might not be the new or the red, but we've got plenty of climbing in Pennsylvania. And if you help us open it and protect access, we'll take care of it, and we'll help drive that. So that's kind of the big picture. And obviously part of that is having sound policies in place.
Yeah. So there were a couple of questions in the chat, Dana. First one was, you mentioned we could partner with a conservation entity to protect that parking lot, have we considered partnering with Access Fund?
I'll let Mike speak to this one, but I think the answer is, let me see if I get it right, is that them being, based in Colorado and holding, parcels in other states is just sort of super complicated in a lot of ways, and that it's better for those to be held at local levels. And we definitely have LCOs like, Southeastern Climbers Coalition, Carolina Climbers Coalition that own crags and own parcels. And so I think that's the model that they're developing. But go ahead, Mike. And
Yeah, no, yeah, that's about right. I mean, we are in a position that if, as essentially a measure of last resort, we could take ownership of a parcel of land, but we would only do so with some sort of a takeout strategy. So ideally, so to back up a little bit, one of the things Access Fund does is we help to fund these sorts of projects, these sorts of acquisitions. We have a climbing conservation loan program that we started back in 2009. And since that time, we've revolved around $2 million in acquisitions, land acquisitions through that fund. And through that, we've helped to acquire in the Northeast here, Hanging Mountain, the Antlion Cliff and the Gunks. And I could probably think of a few more. But Dana has it right. I mean, our goal would be to have either EPAC or the state or another land trust acquire the land, but we could support the acquisition through providing funds up front to help with the acquisition costs. And that's something we're set up to do and we'd be excited to do if the opportunity presents itself. So yeah, that's the answer there.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
The next question was, when considering a view shed closure, as opposed to a linear closure with the peregrines, have we considered using representatives from other states who have had success with view shed closures and helping us with that dialogue?
Yeah, so that's the conversation we're hoping to have in the fall. So the original meeting we had in 2016, I believe it was, we actually were lucky enough to have Eric Murdoch, who was the national policy director at the time. I don't know what his current role is. He happened to be in DC, so we made the meeting around him. So we brought in the biggest guns possible from the Access Fund, and myself, him, Dave Pastorik, we went into this meeting and he had charts and he had all this stuff and we just got blasted. The head ornithologist did not want to hear what we were talking about. But like I said, the good thing is the peregrines are delisted. The ornithologist has retired. Most of the folks that we have to deal with on the Game Commission side are relatively new. And most of the folks on the DCNR side, I've been working with pretty intently over the years. So even though there's been higher turnover, so we're on our 4th state park director now, we have an open dialogue with them. So we think we're at the point where we can sort of re-educate a brand new group of people and say, hey, this is what happened at the Narrows. This is what's happening with peregrines, but this is actually what's happening in the climbing community. So we think that we can use definitely examples from, other places and kind of revisit that conversation. And we've requested a meeting, again, specifically for the Narrows, but hopefully for overall raptor policy, probably sometime in the fall. DCNR is really busy right now, but we want to have that conversation before the next Narrows closure, which would be February 1st, 2023, assuming the pair returns. So...
Awesome. The next question was, how long does a closure typically last? From my understanding and experience, they typically last until they've determined if the nest has been viable. So if they do have hatchlings and it looks like they're going to be a successful pair, they'll wait it out until they fly and leave the nest and they've been successful. Or if they find it was an unsuccessful nesting season, they'll close it earlier. Is that your experience, Mike, Dana?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, generally speaking, and again, this is all very fluid, right? It's nature, kind of things aren't always cut and dry by the calendar, but typically March through July is our nesting season. It can start a bit earlier and it can run a bit later, but that's kind of that 5-month window of time we usually anticipate a closure.
I think all the questions in the chat have been answered. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
I see two more there, Joe, in the chat. I don't know. Oh, I guess it was already answered by this other fellow.
Yeah, it was answered. The whole cliff at Tilbury is all within state forest land. Yeah. I want to say, anyone that showed up tonight shows your dedication and interest in what we do. And I just want to encourage you to do everything you can to get involved in whatever capacity you can. And yeah, we want to just show you that we're here to keep climbing access open and support you as the community. And we want to help make your voice heard. But let's all be in it together and be a positive dialogue in these upcoming next couple of years. It's going to be interesting. More and more people coming outside, and there's not more and more rock appearing. So we're going to have to find a way to share it nicely with all the other user groups that are out there using this land. There was a question in the chat. Will a copy of the minutes be available? We are going to, this meeting was recorded, and we are going to post this meeting.
Yeah, and I would echo sort of what Joe said, and also helping us keep the correct information out there. Like I said, one of the reasons we had this was because there was, a couple posts in social media. Is it open? Is it not open? And we want to make sure people have the right information. And so when you're talking to your friends or you're answering posts or people are asking you questions, if you don't know the answers, direct them, to us, to our website. If it's not on our website, then feel free to email us. If you want to get more involved, if you're looking at Mocanaqua stuff, it's best to contact Joe, and he's just joe@epaclimbers.org. And I'm just Dana@epaclimbers.org, or send something through our website and it'll get to us. We're keeping everybody that signed up tonight on like an email list. So if there's things that happen, we can make you aware. But it's really grassroots at this point in terms of getting information out there, and also if actions need to be taken, sort of circling the wagons. So again, we do appreciate everybody coming out, and also Mike and Ken and Jeanette for jumping on, and the other representatives from not only PA but the Access Fund, because it's really a team effort. Like, we wouldn't have gotten this far in 2 years without constantly pestering Mike on things. And the work that the LCOs in Pennsylvania are doing on behalf of PA climbing in general has been great. So we really want to be in lockstep so that when we go to DCNR, game lands, we know that whatever we do in Eastern Pennsylvania is going to affect our other partners. So we don't want to act in a way that is going to, maybe open something in Eastern PA, but close something in like Southwestern PA or, something like that. So we have a definite collaborative effort going on throughout the state.
If I could interject on that, in that vein, you shared several documents this evening that people should review. I would encourage everybody to just check out the current policies around climbing management in the state of Pennsylvania, so that when you're out there doing what you're doing, that you're sure that you're falling in line with the current policies. I think that's the biggest thing that can help us moving forward, is that folks are aware and familiar with the rules and regulations that are in place for climbing. And so familiarize yourself with those, and make sure that if you have questions, reach out to EPAC or the Access Fund. We can help to limit any issues that might arise out there.
Yeah, we're all in it when it comes to a reputation, and Mike gives great advice there. Our reputation is at stake here as climbers, as users of this land. So let's all contribute in a positive way to our reputation as climbers by following those regulations and being stewards of the land, taking care of the land, and showing these landowners that we care for the land just as much as any other user.